I keep hearing from those peace at any cost type people that a negotiated settlement must take place to stop the war. Lives on either side being lost is tragic. Let me be clear. There is not going to be a negotiated settlement to end the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin remains committed to achieving his aims by force. The Ukrainians remain very committed, and rightfully so, to achieving their aims, which is to eject Russia from Ukrainian territory. And that's all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. History has shown that wars are only usually resolved on the battlefield, with negotiations that take place after the war merely reflecting and ratifying the military realities that one side is going to win and the other side is going to lose. Putin knows this, and he is thinking that he has a military similar to that of the Soviets in World War II in Europe, where the war only ended when Allied forces completely defeated the German military, and it was Soviet troops that stood in the burning wreckage of Berlin. He saw what took place with regard to Japan, when Japan surrendered only after the U.S. demonstrated its ability to destroy the country completely. So Putin thinks that the only way he's going to be victorious is to destroy the country completely. Whether that he realizes he can't do that or not, that is his aim. We've seen similar wars play out this way in history. The American Civil War, the Napoleonic Wars, the Gulf War, all merely ended because the realities on the military battlefield made it such that both sides could negotiate in a way that reflected the winner, that the outcome went in favor of the winner, and the loser had no choice. That is what Putin sees. The problem is Putin's failures to achieve his aims by fighting over the winter shows he just can't impose his will on Ukraine by force. But he remains committed to overpowering Ukraine militarily, or at least protracting this war long enough to mobilize Russia's defense industry and continue to mobilize its population. They have a lot of population. And we saw the defense industry talk when Dmitry Medvedev came forward and told his staff, when he read that letter from Stalin, saying that the industry not supporting the war is essentially treasonous. Putin's efforts to portray Russia as a modern incarnation of Stalin's Soviet Union, able to overwhelm its enemies with unstoppable masses of men and material, is just more of the same. And he's going to continue to do this, even if it means 1 million, 2 million Russians continue to die on the battlefield in Ukraine. He wants to try to continue these mass movements, these mass battlefield tactics where thousands of troops who are poorly trained and poorly equipped try to overwhelm Ukrainian forces. That is far less likely on the modern battlefield right now than it has been on any other battle in history. The Russian military industry, sure, can be set up for a protracted war, but they have no support from the West. The last time they tried to set up for a protracted war and were prepared to do so with regard to World War II, they had the industrial might of the United States behind them through the Lend-Lease Act. The tables have turned. Ukraine has that. So Putin's stubbornness and continuing offensive operations is essentially strategic stupidity or strategic malfeasance that expends Russian resources and, at this point, scarce combat power, and by combat power I mean soldiers and equipment that are used for fighting wars, in pursuit of operationally meaningless gains, but give him a good political story. Bakhmut is one of those examples. On the other side, a series of successful Ukrainian counteroffensives may persuade Putin to enter negotiations, but those negotiations are clearly going to be terms that favor Ukraine, not Putin. So I doubt that's going to happen. He needs to show victory here because this would be history replaying itself. After the war in Afghanistan, when the Soviet Union fought there, a lot of the blowback from that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. You see in history that the losing leader from Russia, Soviet Union, whatever, ends up being deposed relatively quickly. And I don't think this is much different. So the West and Ukraine really have only three choices. The first is clearly unacceptable, and that just means that Ukraine unilaterally ceases fighting in order to create a peace at any cost, as I said before. But that would be a disastrous defeat, and no one wants that other than what I would say is a cowardly or naive populace of people that think that just stopping ends all wars. Problem is it would embolden Russia to move in on Moldova, potentially Georgia, and maybe even further. The other potential situation is we continue where we're at. We fight, we help Ukraine fight Russia in a constrained way. It'll encourage Putin to continue his efforts to pursue outright military victory, though. He doesn't suffer a decisive defeat across multiple avenues of the battlefield, but rather sees small defeats here or there, even counteroffensives that are victorious for Ukraine. Doesn't necessarily mean that Russia would lose the war. He remembers from the history books how Russia was beaten back heavily by the Nazis and then came roaring back, and he probably thinks he can do that again in this situation. The third and my favorite position is the Ukrainians can launch a series of successive counteroffensive operations, meaning more than one, and it's going to take more than one, that split off Crimea and Kherson, that split off Donetsk and Luhansk by taking Severodonetsk and moving northward from the south and moving towards the Black Sea from central Ukraine. And that requires material and intelligence from the West. We're happy to provide the intelligence, but I think we need to ramp up the material. And that's the only way that a settlement, this negotiated settlement that is both morally right in favoring Ukraine, will come forward. Any settlement that Putin sees that isn't him taking essentially the territories he has at the very least, but more than likely wanting the complete removal of the current Ukrainian administration, as well as impossible guarantees that they never join NATO or EU, that is untenable, period. So we need to support Ukraine in victory, not in continuing to protract this war, and certainly not in defeat. And those are the three options we have. And we need to quit dragging our feet, because there is not going to be a negotiated settlement, period.